Hello students, today's video is made for beginners to intermediate level players who would like to learn how to play with the white pieces against the so-called Caro-Kann defense, which happens after you start the game with e4 and your opponent is responding with c6. This is one of the best actual openings for the black pieces. The system that I will teach you for the white color today is not the most ambitious, not objectively the best, but very easy to learn. And if your opponent does not know how to react against that, I believe that you will have very great amount of great positions where you will be able to understand concretely your advantage. Sometimes you end up in a good position. You may not understand what concretely are you better at, then you're not able to capitalize on that advantage. So we're going to play the move d4, which simply takes over the center. That's no miracle. Opponent plays d5, and here we're going to play the so-called exchange variation. We're going to take this pawn. They're going to take back with the pawn because if they take with the queen, of course, they lose the so-called tempo. White can develop a piece while wasting black's time. We're attacking the queen, and so they're unable to develop the other pieces in the meantime. So after they take back with the pawn, now we're going to try and attempt to play against their light square bishop. We're going to try not to allow them to develop that light square bishop to good squares like f5 and g4, and we're hoping to induce the pawn move to e6, after which are going to explain you why this is so good for white if we can achieve that. So we're going to start with the move bishop to d3. In a nutshell, we're preventing them of playing the move bishop to f5, and they could be playing a couple of different ways here. They could perhaps most natural moves are knight f6 and knight to c6, and depends on which move they start with, we're gonna also be reacting differently. If they're gonna play knight to c6 first, this attacks the pawn on d4. We're going to defend that with pawn to c3. When they're going to play knight to f6 and threaten to develop that bishop to g4, which is not necessarily a big deal. Like, even if we allow that, white still would have some kind of an advantage. However, I would like to show you the move h3, which simply prevents that bishop, or we attempt to prevent that bishop to be developed to these squares f5 and g4. Now, if our opponents start with the move knight to f6 and prepare this bishop g4 right away, then we play h3. So now you understand the reason for the moves, and then the move order is very easy to guess. If they're threatening to get bishop f5, we play bishop d3. If they attack the pawn, we have to defend with c3. If they're playing knight f6 and preparing bishop g4, then we prevent bishop g4 by playing this pawn move to h3. Now, after the pawn move to h3, if black is an advanced player, there are a couple of ways of how they could, say, equalize out of this position. Now, first of all, let's take a look at the good options for black, which I believe that beginners will not be able to play. First option is g6. That's absolutely a good move. White plays knight to f3, and then actually black can play the move bishop to f5. Now, think about it. If I flip the board, what is the chance that a beginner level player to intermediate will correctly evaluate that after you develop this bishop to f5, you're allowing white to take, and now the pawns near the king are not intact, you have doubled pawns? I bet that it's very rare for a beginner and intermediate level player to evaluate this correctly. In fact, this position is absolutely fine for black. They might be castling the other way, use the open G file. In fact, black could even castle short, and it is considered that this position is safe for black. Not happening at your level, or I believe this would be shocking, so to say. Now, the other way how black would try and counterattack us is to break with pawn to e5. This is also a good move, and I believe this is something that a beginner may be capable of playing. Then we're simply going to take this pawn, and I'm going to tell you what white's plan is. White's plan is to play in the middle game against the isolated d5 pawn. While this pawn provides black with some extra space advantage, which should in theory help them get the bishops and knights to slightly bit better squares, the pawn itself is considered a weakness because it cannot be supported by other pawns in any of the future. So after we play something like knight to f3, and they grab the so-called bishop pair, they exchange knight for the bishop. Our plan is simply to never allow them to break the with the pawn to d4, as this would attempt to exchange their vulnerable pawn. We are not interested in exchanging a very good soldier for a soldier that cannot be protected by other pawns. So we're going to try to block this pawn and then simply attack it in a metagame. For example, like they develop, we play bishop to e3, have very good grip on the square d4, and after which I'm just going to be showing you a simple development. We play knight to d4, then maybe knight to f3, and we're little by little going to be surrounding like ninjas this pawn on d5 and attempt to make it a target that we're going to win in the middle game. So I think it's a lot easier to play when after just a couple of moves, coach would be telling you, hey, block this pawn and try to do everything you can in middle game to attack that. You have a weakness to play for. Doesn't mean that black played all the best moves or they don't have many alternatives, but there's nothing they can really do about this pawn in the near future. It's a long-term weakness. These two options that we just looked at, e5 and g6, are not going to be as popular at your level as black simply playing e6. I'm sorry to say, but that's how a lot of beginners play. From black's point of view, they need to castle, and the most natural way of developing the dark square bishop is by playing e6, putting this bishop somewhere or e7 or on d6, and simply castling. And so e6 is going to be the most popular move that you will likely encounter, and now we have a long-lasting advantage of black, because black has this bad so-called statically bad piece. It's surrounded by the light square pawns, and there is no really good way to develop it into somewhere active, long diagonal that where it would match something like the light square bishop of white. And from this position, that's what I would be aiming for in my students' games. White is a very, very simple kingside attack, and in general play on the kingside, very easy development, and most of my students are having very, very good results in this middle game. So how will white follow it up? Well, we're playing knight to f3, very simple moves. Castles, we have a very beautiful semi-open e-file for the rook where it protects the knight after we go there. Maybe there could also be lifted, and I have a couple of arrows to share where white is going to be developing the pieces. So this knight from b1 that I highlighted could go to d2, then to f1, then to g3, where it's going to be close at last to the black's king, as we will want to attack that. Not the only square, we could also from f1 later go to e3. The bishop is going to be developed to like f4 or g5, the knight is going to come to e5, and at some moment we would also like to bring the queen somewhere next to opponent's king. So one of the likeliest moves that you may find black is going to play is just b6. They try to develop the light square bishop. We go knight e5, and it's very rare that it's good for black to take this knight, because after we take with the pawn, we win the so-called space advantage on the king side, which means that we're restricting opponent's pieces on that side of the board, and this could be followed by a simple kingside attack. Maybe we could bring the knight first, but sooner or later something like queen h5 comes, and as you can see, black cannot bring as many defenders on the king side as white can bring the attackers. So if they take, that's another trap that we're setting for them, and white has a very good attack from there. Opponent can play something like bishop to b7, bishop f4, simple development, knight to d2, and then slowly but surely we're going to conduct a kingside attack. When we already have pieces developed there, we have all sorts of tactical ideas. For example, if opponent was to like play something like h6, already from here we could play, for instance, knight takes f7, king f7, queen takes e6, scary things, king goes to f8, and after bishop g6, hasta la vista, white is just simply winning the game. And objectively, after black is playing the pawn move to e6, even if black plays perfectly, white actually has an objective advantage, and we're much better to follow into this middle game. So I hope you enjoyed this system that you can try right now against your opponents in the Caro-Kann. Let me know in the comments how successful and how helpful this was. You can consider hiring me as your personal online chess coach. That's my full-time job for many, many years. Thank you for watching the video. Wish you a lot of victories and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.